Hi, I'm Big Ben with this week's episode of Equip Tips, where we have a special guest today, Mr. Pete Stott. Tell us about yourself, Pete.
Well, I'm not from Utah originally. I grew up in California. I moved here to go to school and got a good job. Worked down in Utah County at New Skin, and I'm their staff photographer there. So I kind of have my full-time job as a photographer and then my outside job as a photographer as well. So it's a good life.
So you get to have your cake and eat it too, so
That's
to
right.
speak. And so you do a lot of work with product photography, from what I understand.
Product, headshots, that sort of thing, yeah.
And so
events mostly, actually. Event photography. You know, we do a lot of community stuff. We do a lot of giving back to Utah County and beyond, and I cover a lot of those events. So it's a good gig.
Now, what we have you here today is because you obviously been in commercial photography and in the print business with New Skin. I'm assuming that you have to know quite a bit about monitors, calibration, and getting your prints to match what it is on the screen, right?
Right.
Awesome. So today we're going to be talking about monitor calibration, which some people absolutely dread. I remember when I started out as a photographer, I got Photoshop, got my camera, took some pictures, threw them on the computer, made them look perfect on my screen. They looked absolutely glorious. I go to my local conglomerate, print lab and print out my images, and they absolutely look horrible.
Green.
They look
magenta,
green, they look muddy,
dark.
they black.
Right.
I wouldn't even dare put them up on my fridge for my mom to look at them. I hid them in shame on the hard drive and said, we shall lock these up and never speak of them again. So what do we need to do to make our photos match our screen?
Well, it's all about calibration, really. I mean, setting a baseline so that your display matches what your printer is going to spit out, basically, is what it boils down to. I mean, it's a little more complex than that, but basically, I mean, where I struggled a lot with the same issues where I would see something that looked great even on the back of the camera. I nailed the exposure, the color looks right, it's white balance the way I want, and then I get it on the computer, make a few tweaks, it looks great there, and then the same thing, like you said, it comes back from the printer not looking the way you expect. So what I decided to do, I did a lot of online research, read and viewed a lot of videos, that sort of thing, and I started out with first baselining my camera using a color calibration tool, and then going to monitor calibration, which that to me was the biggest key. This part I could probably do without, but the color calibration for the monitor was the biggest key. That was the thing that if I'm not seeing what or correct or accurate color coming from my monitor, then the chances of me, it's a shot in the dark.
We want the whole what you see is what you get
Right.
type of thing. And so the issue that I've noticed too is that not all monitors are created equal. Just like every TV screen out there, every computer monitor, whether it be a PC or a MacBook or your TV screen at home or any type of screen, all of them, some are brighter, some are dimmer, some are greener, some are bluer. And so the issue is that we got to get these things to where there is a baseline, as you said. So red is really red, green is really green, and blue is really blue,
Right.
and so forth. So they make some cool materials out there, some tools that we can use. And some of these are really expensive and some are kind of on the budget side. What would be the first step to profiling my monitor?
Well, for me, in the research that I did, I went and this is the calibrator that I use. It's the Color Monkey by X-Rite, and it's the Color Monkey Photo. And the reason I chose that one is because it has a couple bells and whistles that I probably don't use a lot. It'll do ambient light readings. It will also calibrate a projector if you're presenting a lot. So I wanted to spend a little bit more in case I needed those features. But for the most part, if you went with just a standard, I don't know much about this one, but I'm assuming that it'll do the job just like any other calibrator. There are budget ones that read the reviews, and if they're not very good, then maybe steer away from them. But these got great reviews, and that was my first thing, was other people are doing the research also, and other people have had experiences with these things, so why not go off of what their experiences have been and read the reviews? So that was for me the first step, was research, try to figure out which one works for what I'm trying to do.
So you do your homework, in other words.
Exactly.
We've got to do our homework. I know my first one was one called the Pantone Huey, and it retailed for about $80.
I had the Huey.
It looked like some type
stick.
of it looked like a popsicle stick with some suction cups on it.
Right.
It did take ambient light readings, and it did great for getting me in the right ball filter in my photos, where I could show them to my mom and put them on the fridge if I wanted to.
Yeah.
You know, but probably wouldn't hang them up in the gallery. Probably wouldn't hang them up in the wall. It's not perfectly there.
It was a little gimmicky for me. I liked that it did the ambient light reading, and that's really what drove me to buy it. Was like, I needed a color calibrator for my monitor. Hey, this one does ambient light reading. It has cool little lights on it, and you know, I didn't do my homework.
Yeah, because we know you like shiny objects, Pete.
Right.
You know, we all do. We like squirrel. And so, well, what I use now, I use the same thing Pete does, and that is the Color Monkey Photo, and that's because it also allows us to profile our printer, meaning not only does it match our printer, or pardon me, not only does it match our computer monitor, so it looks appropriately, and red's red, and yellow's yellow, and so forth, but it also allows us to match our printer to our screen. And so what you see is what you get when you print. You can actually create custom profiles for every type of paper stock that you print on. And so that's what was a big turn on for me with the Color Monkeys, that hey, I'm not only able to profile my screen and calibrate that, but I can also calibrate my printer.
Right.
And at that time I wasn't even doing my own prints. I was sending them off to the lab, but it was a good investment because now I am doing my own prints, and this was like, oh,
exactly.
I can use all the bells and whistles.
Real quick, one thing I failed to mention, that one of the other reasons I bought this one was because I do two monitors. There are some that only let you profile one display, and that's it. This one, coincidentally, allows you to profile two displays separately.
And I did not know that. I've always had two displays, and so I just assumed, but not all calibrator tools will let you do two monitors.
Right.
And that's a big piece. You want both monitors to match as much as you can. And
I have two different types of, I have an LED and I have an LCD. And
wow, so two types of formats even.
Exactly.
A liquid crystal versus a light emitting. So two, and does this do a pretty good job at getting them in the ballpark?
Yep. The only thing that I notice is that my LCD takes a little long to warm up, but the LED, you know, it's on, the color's great. But once the LCD warms up, they match. And they're great. So this one, that's one thing that I needed to make sure is that it was going to calibrate two different displays.
And that's a really good tip, Pete. When you first turn on your computer screens, whether it be a laptop or an LCD monitor for your desktop, you know, or Mac, make sure you let it sit there and warm up for 5 to 10 minutes before you dive into Photoshop or Lightroom and start editing.
Right.
Make sure you disable your screensavers, and make sure you don't have the monitor time out or turn off or go to black, because it has to come back. And yeah, just like a fluorescent lamp, it has to come back and reach that temperature, or that backlight has to reach that point where it's bright enough. So that's a really good tip. Well, I'm going to give you the lab coat of trust here, because we're in the circle of trust, Pete.
You going to put it on me?
I guess I can dress you. It'd be my honor to dress you.
Thanks.
Look at that. It's only a 5X, so I'm sure it's going to fit you. And so let's dive into this. And we're going to use the Color Monkey system to profile our monitor today. Okay. And so let's kind of scoot this out of the way. And we're working on a PC today, but the same thing works for a MacBook or what other fine products.
Yeah, I'm strictly Mac in my workflow, but this looks exactly like what I see on my own computer. So,
all right. So we have our profile here. We're going to open up our Color Monkey software, and I'm going to step out of the way and let you dive right in there.
Okay. So basically, the walkthrough is so simple. They made, you know, before I got into color calibration, I can imagine that it wasn't quite as easy. But this one, because of the display types that have changed over the years, it's going to walk you through an interview process, just saying, you know, what display do you use? Do you want to do an easy or advanced calibration? And as far as these options down here, this was one thing that kind of threw me for a loop. Let's start with step one. Obviously, we're going to be working on a laptop. We're going to do an advanced calibration today. The luminance level. From my
That's
research,
a cool word. Luminance.
basically that's like
luminance.
The luminance, exactly. The brightness of your display. And if it's overly bright, then the chances are that your prints are going to be a little dark because you're going to be seeing something bright and it's awesome. And when you get back from your, one thing that you'd mentioned earlier was that your monitor is backlit. Your pictures likely are not backlit.
Unless it's an X-ray.
Yeah, well, yeah.
So in most screens, you know, they advertise how bright they are, you know, for gamers and stuff. So they'll say, yeah, you know, we're at, you know, we got a luminance of so-and-so value, and half the time I've noticed the calibration tools turn that luminance way down.
Exactly.
Which is not only giving us more accurate color, but it also saves our eyes, especially if you're in a full day of editing,
right.
You know. So, okay, well, this looks pretty straightforward. I mean, it looks bend-proof, you know. Even I can't mess this stuff up.
Sure.
You know, click of the mouse.
The only thing that I changed during my calibration was I set the luminance a little low. My LED display is bright, you know, just out of the box. It's a super bright display. So I turned it down. I wanted a luminance level target of about 90. And
I keep mine at about 80.
Yeah.
So I'm about, you know, I keep that thing way down. So.
And then the target white point, I left it at default, 6500.
Now, what are we talking about the white point? Now, this obviously looks like we're referring to the Kelvin. We're going back to the whole Kelvin scale, D65,
sure.
Meaning 6500K, which is a little bit lighter than daylight,
right.
Somewhere around in there. How do we know what to choose for that setting?
For me, really, it was a preference thing. I liked the way the whites showed up at that 6500. You know, when I went to 5500, it may not be much of a difference, but for me and my style of shooting, I liked the 6500 because that to me was how I wanted my photos to look. On the scale of warm to cool, that was how I wanted. That's where I.
That's where you wanted your whites to be.
Exactly.
So when it comes down to it, you know. You
preference.
can always play around with it and
exactly.
Run some prints or play with some photos and see what you're looking like. Okay.
So once we have our preferences set, just hit next, and it's going to tell you exactly what to do using the tool itself. So when you you got to uncover the eye on the tool itself so it can actually see what it's doing. You want to turn this tool right now. You look at it.
Yeah. See, it's bend proof, so to speak. I mean, it's like a pop-up book. I mean, it has photos. You know, I don't have to even read. It's pretty simple.
And as soon as you turn it, it's going to turn it on the display, and then you hit calibrate. So basically, what it's doing, it's putting the eye that would normally be staring at your monitor in the next step. It's putting it to a place where. It's seeing probably a piece of gray inside or something where it's a constant color and it knows what that color is supposed to look like.
It's setting itself up to be ready to be calibrated.
Exactly.
And every time you profile, it's going to calibrate itself.
Correct.
To make sure you have an appropriate baseline. It
establishes its own baseline every time.
Okay.
So same thing. It's going to tell us we need to put the calibration thing up high, and
for an ambient light reading.
The ambient eye, if you will, is just up there at the top, and it's ready to go. So
we'll go ahead and do that. And with our studio lights today, we got a bunch of light panels up here, LED lights. It's probably going to come back with a lot higher lumens than what we're probably normally seeing. Because one thing with me, I usually edit in a pretty dark room.
Mm-hmm.
I don't edit in a pitch black room enough to where I could still read my watch. I have a dimmer in the room where I can turn down the lights. What's your feelings on what type of ambient light in your room should you edit in?
You know, the same light is really probably the best answer. If you are in a room where the shades are up and you get light cycling throughout the day, you know, sometimes it's direct light, sometimes it's indirect. If you can somehow make that constant or consistent throughout the day, either a shade that still lets light through, but at least it keeps the temperature of the light the same, or just every time you're editing, like you were saying, just close those blinds and try to get it dark. And the overhead lights are going to affect everything. Any kind of light that's coming in is going to affect the way you're seeing your display. So that's kind of what this is going to be doing, is seeing what light is reflecting around the room and probably how you're going to be seeing your display. So it's measuring the ambient color temperature of the light. So sometimes, you know, it's just like if you go out with your camera and you look at and you're on a bright sunny day, sometimes the photo that comes up on the back of your camera doesn't really look right or doesn't look like what you're expecting, because you're either in a bright sunny day and you can't see that.
And I never can. With me, I just look at the histogram, make sure I'm not bumping the edges. That's what I tell been telling the viewers is like, if it's a big day and I can't see what I'm getting, obviously I'm looking in the viewfinder, so I know I'm not decapitating their head or something. I know I'm getting what I want as far as composition. I'm not sure about the exposure or the color. Look at the histogram.
Exactly.
And so, so pretty much this will measure the ambient light.
Right.
And it's going to come up with, you know, kind of what luminance value we're going to set the screen at to match it, as well as the temperature.
Right.
And so if you can keep your room consistent throughout the whole day or night, or, you know...
Or edit the same time of day. But at least, you know, if you've got fluorescents that you're editing with... Nasty, but get them to be... warmed up before you start editing. Everything matters as far as the ambient light and the light coming out of your display, the light that your prints are going to be displayed under. All of that matters because it's all relative to where you are. And that's one thing you probably need to let your clients also know is, hey, I use the right tools to make sure that my color is going to match the prints. And so when you're displaying them online, or when you're viewing my photos, your photos online, take into account that your display probably isn't calibrated. So if they look a little off,
and that's a hard thing for me to swallow, because I mean, you know, I'll shoot a wedding, or I'll shoot family portraits, or I will shoot a commercial, you know, for a commercial client, and I put them up on my website for them to proof, and they're at home and they're on a regular, you know, old school tube monitor. Who knows what they might have. And they call me up and say, the prints look really bright and a little bit green. And you have to say, trust me. Right. So I've noticed what a lot of guys are doing, they're actually meeting with the clients now, taking an iPad with them, or taking something and saying, come meet with me and I'll show you what it looks like on an actual calibrated monitor. And as of right now, there's really no way around that as far as getting the clients to see what you see.
Unless they're in the same environment that you saw when you were editing. That's really the only time.
Okay.
All right, so back to this.
It was
measured. a really fast measurement. Now that it's done, it gives us that nice little check mark. Now it's going to tell us to go back. One thing I noticed with the Color Monkey is that if you hit this this middle button here, it's going to kind of throw you to the beginning of the whole process.
I've done that with my chubby fingers on multiple occasions.
So you got to be careful just to
kind of grab the outside and turn the wheel
steer
there.
With the outside, exactly. Now,
10 and 2.
One of the other big things is to make sure that the eye is not covered. You know, that there's a
and that's just
shield.
a safety, a dust shield.
So make sure that that's open so that it can actually see your display. So now that we're in the right position, again, hit next. So on the display, we have a place. It just tells you to put it right in the center of your display. And it's got this little sandbag strap, so it kind of holds things in place.
You might have to play with this a little bit, depending on your monitor. Spread them apart, you know, if you will. If the USB cord's yanking it down, go ahead and flip it behind. And you just want to make sure, what I've noticed, if it's not all the way flush with the screen, there's light can leak in.
Exactly.
And the other thing is, too, if you got an LCD screen with a soft front, you don't want to be wiggling the monitor or bumping your desk. Yeah, the flex. You want to make just...
I generally, when I do this, it's a short enough process that I just kind of hold it in place. I you know, obviously if you're going to have an unsteady hand,
if you're me,
yeah. So if you know, if we feel like it's a good flush contact there, hit next, and
now it's going to start doing its thing.
What the first test that it's going to run is going to be contrast. So what that's going to do, it's going to tell you, hey, your display might be a little too bright, a little too dark, and we can adjust the brightness accordingly. And this is a pretty short, it's almost done.
And if your monitor, in what it's going to come up, and right now I have a laptop here, so it doesn't quite have, you know, it's not a really fancy monitor where I can really adjust the backlight a lot. It's like in, you know, larger, you know, I guess you say 10 segment or 10 count jumps in brightness. So I kind of just have to get it as much as I can So I'm going to go ahead
and you'll notice
attempt to do
here
this.
on our it did the ambient light reading and said that our target luminance is going to be 246 versus the 90 that we
And that's
chose.
because of these.
Exactly. It's because of these studio lights that we have.
I mean,
in
we're
there.
being blasted with probably about 3,000 watts right now. And so I'm going to go ahead and say like I am going to be editing under these lights all day because I'm cool like that. And we're going to go ahead and turn up that balance if I can remember how to do it on this thing.
Are we at the top end of it?
I don't think so. Yeah, we are. So let's assume we've reached that. The indicators come up to the middle.
So yeah, for sake of the demo, now we've hit our. What this is going to do here on the display, it's going to tell us when we hit our target. So right now that up arrow is telling you go a little brighter with your display because the luminance that you are achieving right now isn't enough. And as soon as you hit that level, you're going to be in that green area on this display. As soon as it's in that area, then go ahead and hit next, and it's going to do the next part of the calibration, which is the color
RGB. So it's going to run through. It's running through swatches of red right now.
Right.
Then it'll run through the swatches of green or blue.
So basically,
and so forth.
what it's reading, it knows what color those swatches should be, how they should be coming out of your display, and it will adjust accordingly. It'll adjust your color gamut so that the curve, if you will, isn't just a straight curve that's coming out of your display, but the curve that matches what those colors should be displaying.
So it knows what green it's showing. It's gonna then read the green that it's displaying, compare the two,
and compensate,
and then compensate accordingly.
Exactly.
And I guess Color Monkey is now introducing a newer version of this.
I don't even know what it's called. It was announced this week. And basically, the few things that I took away from my little overview reading was that it's a super fast calibration. It doesn't require as much time to calibrate. So, and that's another thing that I kind of failed to mention earlier was that I calibrate. The Color Monkey has a tool to remind you. Do you want me to remind you once a week, once every 2 weeks, once a month? I do
never.
it once, or never, which probably shouldn't do because you'll forget. Calibrate at least a week, because the possibility of a little bit of color shift is always there. So
usually for me, it takes me this whole process. Obviously, we've been describing it, but if I were at home and doing this alone, it's just like under 5 minutes. It's pretty quick,
and it's worth it.
And usually with each shoot I do, or each new sequence or client, I'll go ahead and do another profile for that.
Yeah.
So we're doing that. So, all right, so it's done.
The process is finished.
It's cooked.
It is cooked.
We can take the chicken out of the pot.
So close up our dust shield, put the Color Monkey back. So now that it's done, you probably don't want to unplug anything because...
No, leave the toaster plugged in.
Yeah, until it tells you that the process is completely finished. Just leave it as it is. I generally, for my purposes of staying organized, since I'm doing dual monitors, I usually say main display or main, and then today's date, so that I know when it was calibrated, which display it was on, and because the name of the profile really doesn't matter, unless you're gonna have a lot of them, then you need to have some organization. So that's the way I do it. I just put a date in there so that I know when it was last calibrated, in case the reminder doesn't come up or something like that. Then at least I know I'm using the latest profile that it was, that it gave me. So for today's purposes,
we'll go ahead and name this then, and it's going to ask us to name it, and we'll call this Framed Studio. Actually, we're at Picture Line, so let's call it Picture Line. And I'm chicken picking right now because I can't type on a laptop. Picture Line Studio, and then I put today's date. And what year is it, Pete?
2004.
That's what I thought.
And I think it's ICM was the extension that was on there, but I guess it probably doesn't.
It'll probably put that on there.
Okay.
And so now we've profiled. It's going to ask us, like we were just talking, how often does this want to remind us?
I put it to the lowest setting myself.
Yeah, a week. So in 1 week, it's going to remind me. And what's really neat now, it's going to pop up the next set of GUI menu here you're going to see is, you can see it before and after, so you can click on it and see, then you can see what it looks like after.
Right.
And
it's a little warm here because of the lights and the whole setting.
Yeah, these lights are actually, like we were talking white balance in another episode. This is very similar, that the color of these lights is a lot bluer a lot higher on the Kelvin scale. These are probably anywhere from 5600 to 6500 K lights. And so before, when I was in my room at home when I calibrated this,
you're in a warmer environment.
I was in a warmer environment. So since we're moving opposite,
right,
it's gonna actually it actually made my screen move on the Kelvin chart to.
And you can see, you know, the little display. If you're straight on this display, you can see that you can see color all the way until it reaches black on every scale. So you know that the calibration is probably pretty spot on. And it's kind of fun to see that there's a change versus, you know, where you were to where you should be. And it's kind of nice it kind of gives you a little peace of mind knowing that it's actually doing something. It's not just some gimmick. So yeah, hit next. And right now, if you wanted to, we could move to the next step of
profiling a printer.
Exactly.
And that's a whole nother animal.
Well, color is a huge animal. And for the purposes of getting prints to look like your display, to give you the peace of mind of knowing that what you're looking at on your display is what is correct. That's really why I use a calibration tool. And then when I move on to the printer portion of it, that's a whole nother step. So at least for now, we know that what we're looking at on our display is going to be the correct color.
Awesome, Pete. Well, thank you so much for coming out today and showing this. For those of you who have never calibrated before, this is an awesome way to get into it. It's absolutely a must-have. Before you go out and buy your printer, go out and buy that next lens, go out and buy that next light. To edit any photos in a digital workflow, you know, post-production, you have to have some type of form of calibration.
Do your clients and yourself a favor by calibrating.
Save yourself the headache of like banging your head into things, throwing things down the driveway. I mean, I went through all this. We both did. Yeah. You know, and you're kind of like, you know, what in the heavens is going on here? You know, and it was such a headache. And then you're like, oh, you got to calibrate your monitor. And when we started doing this, they didn't quite have this stuff yet. It was still some of the older primitive stuff, which had more steps. I think I calibrated on a CRT monitor, the old cathode ray tube.
With the buttons on the tube.
With the buttons on the tube, you know, and I later took that out and used it as target practice because they are fun to blow up. But for those of you who have been calibrating in the past, you know, take heed to some of these tips today. Make sure if you're calibrating an LCD monitor that it is warmed up. Make sure that you are profiling your display often. You know, take the time to do it.
Make sure that your editing environment is constant.
Make sure you have a consistent and constant editing environment, controlling the ambient light in the room, whether it be shutting the blinds. Especially if you're like me and I'm, you know, there's nights where I'm, you know, swearing in After Effects at 3 in the morning, you know, or trying to get that shoot done that's supposed to be due in 3 hours at 8 a.m. And so if you're one of those where you're editing all the time, a nice dark room to where you can still have some ambient light, is just consistency. I guess that's all there is to it. So,
and that's basically what you're doing throughout this process, is giving yourself consistency with your display, with your prints, with your editing environment, all of that stuff. You're establishing a baseline of consistency, and that's really the key to all of this.
Consistency, consistency, consistency.
That's right.
Tylenol sales will go down across the globe once you get this stuff done, because you won't be taking them. All right. Well, thank you for joining us today, and we thank Pete Stott for stopping in and showing us about monitor calibration. I'm Big Ben with Equip Tips, and we bid you say happy shooting. Ready, 1, 2, 3. Happy shooting. There we go. We got it.